Shuvi, I should tell you that as you are our guest tonight, we have this tradition of if the guest comes a little bit before the time, we ask him the following. What is it you want to tell us about yourself that you're not going to tell us in 2 minutes?
Great question. Wow. I wasn't going to tell you this, but I have 5 kids and they're in different stages of going to bed at this point. It's 8 p.m. Here in Jerusalem. So hopefully none of them will disturb us in the middle of the Zoom.
Right. Excellent. I'll see your 5 and I'll raise you 1. We've got 6, but some of them are already sound asleep. And the others, I don't know about the process. Yeah, some of them are in the process, and some of them will keep us late, up much later. So there we go. We're in the same boat, so to speak. Okay, and it's roughly, I think it's the time, so we'll start, and I guess others will join us as in the coming few minutes. So Shuvi is a very, very welcome guest here. We run in the same circles, I must say, in so many aspects, and we probably have gazillion, you know, I don't know if gazillion is a real number, but it's not far from that, common friends. We are both, I feel that I'm introducing myself as well, which I shouldn't be doing, but she is an alumna. Okay, we are both alumni of an honors program at the Hebrew University called Revivim, which is a fancy Hebrew word for rain, copious rain. And it's an honors program for teachers in Jewish studies. We both actually went the same direction. We both took the Bible of that. You have to understand, you can take different departments, and we're both kind of a Bible studies department. You can unmute. I just muted the others, Shuvi. So you can open your mic and.
Okay, great.
Okay, very good. Excellent. And Shuvi, as opposed to me, was good enough, or one of the best, that she was called back to be a pedagogical mentor until recently in the Revivim program. I was like the ones that they kept, you know, secretly aside. They're not that very good, so they can go and be whatever they want to be. We take the best back. So she went back and was a pedagogical mentor in that program. She also works for the National Library of Israel. Guys, it's the government. Yeah, they talk about the government in our lives. Now we are the taxpayer in action. No, but only my taxpayer money, and she's not even doing it on office time. So there you go. She's volunteering like everyone. And thank you very much for doing that. So she's working for the National Library of Israel, and she's a part of the Humanities Center of the National Library of Israel. And specifically, she runs point on teachers' communities in Jewish studies and tradition and culture. And I am probably forgetting many things because she has been doing much more, like Elul and others. So if there is anything significant else that I forgot, you're more than welcome to complete the picture. Shuvi, welcome aboard.
Thank you. So I don't know, I understand the format is that I'll be speaking for a certain amount of time and then you can ask questions, but I'm encouraging you to also stop me in the middle if you like to discuss or ask a question in the middle.
Oh, be sure I'll do that.
Okay.
Right.
So like Netanel said, I am also an alumna of Revivim. I'm actually also married to a graduate of Revivim. We studied together in the same cohort. He today is a principal of a school. And for many years, I taught Jewish studies, Jewish philosophy, and Bible in a public school, a public Israeli public school, and a middle and high school. And after some years working in the system, I started also mentoring teachers in various programs. and ultimately also in Revivim. I came back to Revivim to sort of to mentor the teachers to be. And I also worked in Hartman Institute and in David Yelin College, mentoring students as well and teachers. My recent workplaces, like Netanel mentioned, is I work at the National Library of Israel, but I also spent 2 years in New York together with my whole family, my husband and our kids. We spent 2 years as emissaries for the World Zionist Association.
That's the guys from the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. If they were real, that would be those guys.
Possibly. So we spent 2 years in New York. For me, it was actually a really nice closure because I was born in New York. My parents decided to make Aliyah to come to Israel and live in Israel when I was born, more or less. That's why they called me Shuvi, which is actually short for Shuva Tziona, which means returning to Zion. So lucky for me, I wasn't a boy because then they would call me Sha'ar Yashuv. They say no matter what, I would have been a Shuvi, but I think Shuva Tziona is a little bit better than Sha'ar Yashuv. But as you can see the biblical references here, my parents were very Zionistic and very oblivious of what those kind of names would look, would really, how they sound in Hebrew and not just in English in their minds, but okay. So I was born in New York, and I actually also spent 3 years as a child in New York later on in my childhood when my mother was doing her postdoctorate. So I went to the same school that we later came to as emissaries to work in. And so my kids went to the school I went to as a kid, which was really cool. And I also got to spend a lot of time with my extended family because my parents were the only ones to come to Israel. I have a few, not a very large family, but a few aunts and uncles and cousins who I don't see often. So it was a great opportunity for my kids also to get to know them. And so that was for 2 years we did that. We taught Hebrew and Bible in a modern Orthodox liberal high school. And we've been back
Which
in Israel
one?
in SAR High
Oh,
School
it's
in New
like,
York.
guys, you should know, it's
Yeah,
like
that's
a
like a
very
fancy
famous,
high school. Yeah,
fancy.
very top notch, top notch. A very interesting work environment. Also for us as teachers coming from the Israeli public school system, it was a very interesting experience for us. So not only as a family, but also as educators, to see what it's like to be involved in Jewish education in a community like the one in Riverdale, New York. And since my return, I indeed worked in a place called Elul, which is what's called a Beit Midrash. It's sort of, I would say, adult education in the form of Beit Midrash learning, meaning discussions and text reading usually by adults. That's what I was in charge of there. And now I work in the National Library in the education department. My most recent project that I'm involved in the National Library is actually developing content for Jewish communities around the world and primarily in North America. Because of the cancellation of many summer camps, there are a lot of educators out there looking for digital activities, digital content, activities that they can actually send their students or their learners, the kids who would have otherwise been in camp and really be immersed in a Jewish education experience and are stuck at home over the summer like many of us. So we started developing some content for this initiative, and we're just getting our feet wet. We really plan on developing more long-run programs as well. So that's one of the things I'm involved in right now.
Right. Do you know the movie Inception?
No.
Inception? Okay, so he has a dream in a dream in a dream. So we're now having a conversation about developing like a coronavirus disease Jewish education within a coronavirus disease Jewish education program. So it's like a uh, that's
Yes,
the
yes.
feeling I get. Here,
So
moreover, just to summarize two things I wanted to let you know. I know a guy whose name is Shari Shuv, and he's nicknamed Shuvi. So
really,
yeah,
wow. I have
so
to
so
meet
that
him.
yeah, so that's one, and the other one, Adi Marili is a good friend as well. You know, of the Vidyalin. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So we didn't
okay,
work at the same time, but yeah. So I actually want to reference something that I once said in one of the big synagogues in Riverdale, New York, when we were there. I was asked on the day of, I think it was either around the Independence Day of Israel, or I think around then, that I was, they approached me to ask if I would say some words in the synagogue to the community about being Israeli or something like that, or being a Jewish educator in Israel. And the gist of my speech was that one of my main goals is to make people feel at home in their own tradition. And I know that seems a little like an oxymoron, because if it's your own tradition, then why wouldn't you feel at home? But the truth is, and I'm sure this is not only true for people who live in Israel, or for the Jewish culture. I think many people feel that the younger generations aren't as familiar with a lot of things that they would have, they think are really necessary and crucial parts of the tradition. And to the extent that sometimes people are very reluctant to make changes, or to maybe voice their opinions about tradition or about their culture, because they're not so secure and they don't have that confidence of feeling at home. So I spoke a lot about what it means to feel at home in your tradition. And I think that feeling at home means being really familiar with your background, your tradition, your history, your heritage. But it also includes, I would say, taking responsibility, because if you feel at home and it's your home, then you take ownership, and you take responsibility, and you don't wait for someone else to tell you what's right or wrong. And you feel that it's part of your mission, or part of your destiny, is to continue to be part of this tradition and this culture. And I think that one of my goals as an educator is to encourage young students and older students to, I work with children and with adults, to really play an active role in not only preserving and learning about the past, but also, I think, taking responsibility for the present, and actually creating and developing this culture in the future. Meaning having that sort of the big picture in mind, and not just saying, this is so fragile and this is something that was passed on to me and it's not really mine, so I'm just going to sort of keep it the way it used to be. Because I think what's amazing about Judaism is that it really did evolve over the years. And in Israel, unfortunately, sometimes you see, I'm sure you see on the news or in other places, but there's a lot of tension between different groups in Israeli society. And I think that each individual and each group really needs to have a say in what Judaism is, and not let someone else define that for them. So that's one of my big goals as an educator.
Very good. And it's very interesting, because indeed there are some quirks in the Israeli system that are very, very foreign to the American ear. Even saying I taught Bible, Jewish studies, Jewish philosophy in a public school, that would be like an oxymoron in and of itself for an American ear, and even the whole notion of teaching Bible and the way it is taught in the Israeli school system, which Israel was founded as, I would say, far from a religious state, though there was no division of state and church, so to speak, a religious institution. So it was, you have to learn Bible in Israeli public schools, but the way you learn it is, again, if I would say non-religious, that already would kind of be, it's not the traditional religious way of teaching Bible. And moreover, oftentimes the students are more traditional than the teachers, and really that differs where you teach. Sometimes.
Yeah, it's very interesting, that point, that sometimes I come from a religious background, and I consider myself, I live an Orthodox, liberal Orthodox way of life. I am part of a community, a synagogue, where women and men are partners in the rituals. And yet, coming to a secular school, some students will say to me, "You're just not even like this is so against Judaism. What you're saying, like your liberal ideas are just. How could you say that? Where they don't even go to synagogue, they're not even part of that kind of community. They don't even see themselves as religious Jews, and still they feel the need to say to me, you know, what you're saying is sacrilegious. You know what I mean? Like, it's interesting
Yeah,
to.
I know the synagogue that they don't go to is more conservative, not in a small c, lowercase c conservative than your synagogue. You know, which makes it indeed paradoxical on several levels because they are forced to learn Bible, okay, and they are taught it in a more liberal way than they would. You know, it's again the inception kind of thing. You know, a paradox within a paradox. It like a theme that we have here today. But let us talk a little bit about your current place of work, the National Library of Israel. Again, one of the interesting quirks. Let me just share with a crowd. If you publish a book in Israel, more than 50 copies, two of them you are obligated by law to send to the National Library of Israel. Believe it or not, again, you know, for an American ear, that would be, who, what? You make me send you books, you know, on my dime? That would be crazy, but this is how it is. And so, what is the National Library of Israel?
Okay, so it's interesting because I think that the National Library is really going through a huge change and a big shift over the past few years. I would think that every library in the world is going through some kind of transition these days, because once everything is digitized and once knowledge and texts are so accessible online and in other ways,
Right. We had, by the
then
way,
obviously
just
the
about
library.
2 weeks ago, we
Yeah.
had Itamar Kremer from Beta Tfutzot. I don't know if you know Itamar Kremer, but he is running the. Oh, you know Itamar.
I don't know him
Uh,
personally, but I know who he is. Yeah.
right. So Itamar Kremer is a
I don't
friend.
know him personally, but I know who he
Right.
is. Yeah.
Okay. So he's a friend, and he came and he spoke with us about the new face of Beta Tfutzot. Again, he started from the old face and then gave us a little bit of history, and then we talked about the new face of Bet Hatfutzot. Even he doesn't, I don't think he likes the name so much, but yeah. So in a sense, it relates
Yeah.
to the shift of
So
libraries and museums that we.
right, right. I think that if libraries especially want to stay relevant and have some value for contemporary society, they really need to reinvent themselves. And I think the National Library of Israel is doing a great job in digitizing everything so that it's more and more accessible to the public, and also actually proactively suggesting activities and resources to the public, and not just being a place for scholars and specialists to come and sit and sort of hibernate there and just, you know, immerse themselves in the books, but rather the library realizes its role in reinforcing Jewish identity and national identity and, you know, modern identity. I feel like it's part of the story of people who live in Israel and of Jews all around the world. And what's really special about the National Library, I think, is that it carries the story of the Jewish people. So like Netanel was saying, every single book that was ever published in Israel has a copy in the National Library. But furthermore, there are records of communities from all over the world in different times of history that are all they all sit in the archives of the National Library. And again, we could say that one of the main goals is to just preserve those artifacts, but more and more over the years, I think the library is understanding the value of exposing those things to the public, making them relatable,
Accessible, right?
mm-hmm. making them part of a discussion, making them part of inquiry when people, and not only students in school, but people in the public want to explore a topic or maybe something about their own community or about the place they came from. Because, you know, in Israel, we're all basically immigrants from another place in the world. So there are many very
Let me
interesting
tell you a
stories of
story, a
people.
funny story about it. I'm an officer in the reserves, and I was back when I served in the regular. I was leading what is known in Hebrew as Sidrat Chinuch. This is a few days that you take off with the soldiers, and you go to a place to talk about values, education. We went to Sde Boker, where Ben Gurion used to live. the community in the Negev, in the southern part of Israel. And I wanted to make that point, that everybody came from somewhere else, and it's very much an immigrant society, melting pot. Both my parents were not born here. Both my wife's parents were not born here. So I was sitting with the soldiers, and I was asking, I want anyone whose parents were born here whose grandparents were born here to raise their hands. Nobody raises their hands. So afterwards, I went to the Druze soldier. I said, why didn't you raise your hand? Yeah. So we had one Druze soldier whose grandparents were surely born here in Israel, but he did not, he either didn't understand, he wasn't listening to me, which is probably the story of my life as a teacher. So, yeah. So, that was just a funny story about how this is the case for everybody here.
Yeah. So I think that the library's role in the process of inquiry for people to dig deeper into their own identity and into their family's story and into their community story, or to learn about other communities and other people. I think the library has a very big central role in that process. And I think that as the years go by, Israelis can appreciate more and more how important it is to learn the story. Okay, to learn the story of the Jewish people at large and of other communities. So I think it encourages people to listen to others and to be capable of encountering people who are different than them, and not just assuming that we all have the exact same story, which was part of the ethos of the state of Israel for many years. And there was a point in history that was an important narrative. But these days, I think we're all more aware of the fact that there's more diversity, and that we need to respect that diversity and the people's roots and where they came from, and to respect all the cultures that make up what Israeli society is today. So that's a really important part, I think, of what the library is doing.
Right. I was using the melting pot, obviously, metaphor, which is what it used to be, and today more like a mosaic. I would say, the approach is a bit different. Again, the same goes with Bet HaTfutzot, with kind of a shift of an emphasis. If we're already talking, by the way, guys, just so you have a bit of numbers, the National Library of Israel, you have more than 5 million volumes or whatever, books and stuff. Amazing stuff they have. And it's not just a library. And the reason it started as a very research-oriented institution was because it was, up until recently, actually partly up until today, it's part of the Hebrew University. It's kind of a combination of the state and the Hebrew University. The Hebrew University was was obviously founded before the state itself. So in a sense, there is kind of a mishmash of much of the ownership there. Yeah.
I have to say that there's some fascinating stories about how the library basically collected not only books, by the way, there are also collections of audio recordings of different communities.
The National Phonothek.
Right. And there's also collections of liturgy also recorded, and also ephemera, which is anything from newspapers to posters to postcards that people wrote each other.
Yeah, I took 12 points in Greek. I hope I know what is ephemera for a day. Okay, and we use it also in English, ephemeral, something that is transient. So
exactly, something that wasn't meant to be.
Nobody uses it in Hebrew, though it's an official
only in the
word.
Library.
Right, but only in the library. It's an official Hebrew word that is only used in the National Library and possibly in the academia of the Hebrew language. Though I would bet my my money that not all of the members of the academia would know what is ephemera. Maybe, who knows?
Yeah. So, and it's so interesting because, like you were saying, Netanel, it's items that weren't meant to be preserved. They were just everyday kind of things. Who saves the newspaper every single day? But if you go to the National Library, you can really view newspapers from different communities around the world, and also from Israel, from any year and any date, which is amazing. And you can listen to music or to a liturgy recorded from different communities around the world and more. So yeah, I definitely think it's a very rich archive. It's not just about the books, and it's definitely not just about novels or a certain genre of books. And it begs the question: um, what is Jewish literature? Is it just literature written by Jews? Is it literature written for Jews? And there are a lot of identity questions there. So again, the law is that if it's published in Israel, even if it's in the a lot of books are in
Swedish.
Arabic, and then there are also obviously there are copies of those books in the library. And in general, the National Library also preserves many things that have to do with Islam and Christianity
And
in
Middle East,
Israel.
and yeah, right.
Yeah, and it's really an important, I would say, an important junction between different cultures that are in Jerusalem and in Israel at large. So it really is like you really can find a lot of things in the library. You have to know how to look, and I think that's also getting a little bit easier. But yes, it's an amazing, very interesting place. And actually, there's now they're building a new campus for the National Library. Like Netanel said, it used to be a part of the Hebrew University, and now it is no longer. So now there's also going to be a separate building for it, and the way it's being designed is much more open, also from the architectural point of view. More windows, a more open kind of atmosphere, something that really invites the public to come in and to enjoy the treasures of the National Library.
Right, and your section of the National Library is not an ordinary, not what one would think of as a library in a sense. When we have this image of a library, we think of like big study, lots of books, people sitting together, and an old lady shushing everybody. So that's what we think of. But your section is actually dealing with a very different, as you said, trying to not just make things accessible, but also outreaching from the library to the community, and not just the community of Israel. It's not just dealing with Israel, but also dealing with Jewish communities in the diaspora. So first of all, someone asked in regards to something that we've talked about before, could you give an example for that simplify that gives us a taste of how Hebrew Bible is taught in Israeli public schools, okay, outside the context of religion, okay? And secondly, what are those outreach programs that you do, to get from the library outwards in Israel, and especially with Jewish communities abroad? So that's like a 3 question.
Okay. So remind me if I forget something as I'm going along. But
I hope I'll remember, right.
regarding the first question, so I would say that the emphasis in teaching Bible in a secular school is very much the historical, geographical, political background of the narratives in the Bible, for instance. So, for an example, when you're teaching about King David, you're basically taking the text apart and trying to help the students see different agendas that appear, let's say in the book of Samuel's or Kings, where we can really identify, and this is biblical scholarship, like classic biblical scholarship, we can identify different strands of political groups maybe that existed at the time of writing the text, which in a religious school you wouldn't say this, but in a secular school you can definitely say that it wasn't God who wrote this text, but people, and they lived in different times in history, and they didn't necessarily live in the time of David. It's not someone who's recording David. It's not a reality show. It's a historian maybe who's writing the story in retrospect, and all
Just
of these things.
just for the crowd, I would just say that even a reality show is not a reality show. So if
True,
you're
there's
watching
editing there too. Yeah, there's a lot of editing.
Not just the editing, the kind of the promotion of certain reactions, they put people in certain positions.
Correct.
So yeah, sure.
Correct. So that's something, for instance, that I think in a religious school, maybe also in a religious Christian school, but definitely in a religious Jewish school, Those are the kind of things that you would probably not say. Most teachers who teach in those schools probably don't even believe in that. Now, if you're teaching in the secular school system, whether or not you believe in it, the curriculum really demands teaching that in a certain way. So I can even say from the Revivim point of view that we were trained to be teachers for Judaic studies in secular high schools. And so even though some of the people in the program are themselves religious and they see themselves as part of their identity as being religious, they realize that they come with some humility and respect to the secular Jewish identity, and they really need to teach these topics in that vein and not present some religious ideology in the classroom. So again, the things are taught much more with an emphasis on the historical background, on the way things were written. I would say also more of an emphasis on the drama, the human drama behind the scenes. But I think and I hope that also in religious schools, that's an element that exists, because that's what makes the Bible so interesting. And I would think it would be a shame to only use it as a vehicle for religious messages. I hope that
again, I don't know what's going on. I grew up in the religious system, and I went through Revivim. I think that when they interviewed me at Revivim, they had like a bit of a reservation. Listen, he has kind of too religious background. What could, I think they were a little bit intimidated in that sense, but they got me. I don't know if they're happy, but they accepted me anyway. I think that even in the right, you were saying.
Continue.
No. So the point that I'm making is that I doubt it that any of what you said is necessarily excluded from the religious schools. It really depends on the school and depends on the teachers, and I would even say vice versa. You don't have to kind of necessarily not believe in divine inspiration of the writing of the Bible when you teach in a non-religious school. So there is, while the general lines in broad breaststrokes that you've portrayed is definitely the case, I would say there is a bit of a more leeway in kind of both sides. You can be more religious in the sense, and even as I said, in many places the students themselves are more traditional, and you can be more academic or more, again, secular, or I would say academic in a religious school, depending on the religious community specifically. And as we both know, once you close the door,
no one knows what you're doing.
Yeah. Right? Nobody knows what you're doing, and every teacher has his own like emphasis with the curriculum and so forth. Especially if it's not like geared towards the matriculations exam, and then where you're very much limited. If you're in the previous years, you can kind of play with it. It depends on the institution, I would say.
Yeah. So that's to answer the question about what that looks like in a secular school. And the other question was about what I do, what the educational department does in the National Library. I see that someone asked about how far back the things in the library are from.
What's the earliest thing you've got?
So, I mean, again, I'm not a librarian, and I don't work in the archives. So I'm like, I know that there are manuscripts as early as like the 9th or 10th century. I know that there are things from the Cairo Geniza. There are all kinds of artifacts and manuscripts that are, again, most of these items are not shown to the public, not in the flesh, but they exist somewhere in the archives in the basements. And it's a lot of people also bring things to the library, private collections or things that were salvaged from communities that were destroyed in different places in the world over history. There are a lot of heroic stories about, things that were salvaged and saved from Jewish communities that were destroyed over the years. So
yeah.
That's about that.
Yes, Simon, do you have a question concerning that?
Well, it's more of a statement rather than a question, because I was listening with so much empathy, because I'm English.
We couldn't
I
tell.
thought-
The accent, I didn't know if you're American or English.
I
but
know. I could have been like Canadian or something,
maybe.
but I don't say a boot. Right, so I'm English. You know, I find it to this day very difficult to go to Ireland. It's only like 100 miles across the water. It's 30 minutes on the airplane. I see rivers of blood whenever I go to Ireland. I see what we've done to the Irish over 1,000 years. It's about okay. I'm slightly biased because I'm a quarter Irish and I'm entitled to an Irish passport. I haven't bothered applying for it. But you know what it makes me think is that what you're talking about, establishing a library, a documentation, you know, that will appeal to everybody. It's for everybody. It's not just for, you know, me with my particular bias, my particular, I'll be gone in 20, 30 years. But you're doing those things. That's incredibly important. You know, when you know that a library was burned, like Alexandria, whatever, that was a horrific thing. I mean, it's
You know the
horrific
story
thing.
about the burning of the library of Alexandria? Omar ibn al-Khattab, he came to Alexandria. He saw this library and he wanted to burn it. So they came to him and they said, "Oh, come on, you cannot burn it. It holds such a vast knowledge. It's so important. How would you go about? Why would you burn it?" So he said the following: Listen, two options. Either what's there contradicts the Quran, and then it has to go, or it agrees with the Quran, and then we already have the Quran. So burn it, and they burned it.
I think, you know, Netanel, you know, you and I have put up with each other for 11 years now. No, we've never unfriended each other in Facebook.
But that's the story.
Yeah, I know. You and I have stuck together because we don't believe that.
What do you
That's
mean?
right.
The story?
No, we don't believe that's the way to
Oh, sure.
proceed. Yeah.
I think the National Library of Israel, by the way, you should understand, I don't know if you've overheard it, but it's a center for Islamic literature and Middle Eastern literature, and it preserves culture, everything written in Israel, published in Israel, Arabic, Hebrew, Indonesian, it doesn't matter. It holds a place in the
I
national...
speak Indonesian. Do you not know
Right.
that I speak?
No,
Saya
whatever.
bercakap bahasa Indonesia. You know I spoke Indonesian, didn't you?
Right. So Swedish as well.
I don't speak Swedish. It's too boring. I mean, the alcohol's too expensive in Sweden.
Okay, so we took your words to heart, and we're continuing with the outreach of the National Library of Israel. Thank you.
No, but it's a
Simon.
hugely important thing to do. That is a hugely important thing to do, to establish a national library, because it's context free. Anyone can go to it.
Oh, but
you know, I can speak. I mean,
there is never context free. There is never context free.
But there is. I don't think you're right there, because do you remember when we were discussing the book of Job, and we talked about the word am.
Right.
People.
Right. Professor, we've discussed, just to give a context for Shuvi, we had Professor Ed Greenstein, and we've talked about his new translation of the book of Job, and he said that his new translation, he translates the word am in light of the Egyptian as wise people.
That is so beautiful. That's 2,600 years old, and it hit a mind 2,600 years later. I just think that is, amazing. And what do you do if you're establishing a library? You're creating those kind of possibilities. Now I'm going to shut up now because I've talked too much.
Okay.
So I'd actually like to take that thought. I think that the library really does encapsulate a lot of values that are important, and not only in the Jewish community, but I think in general, people today are looking for context. They're looking for meaning. They're looking for roots. And I think that the library has a real role in helping people discover those things. In my work in the library, so one of the things I do is work with communities of teachers, where the concept is that teachers should continue to grow and develop even when they're in the field. And it's not that they know their profession and then they're just put in the classroom and goodbye for the next 50 years, but rather to recognize the fact that they are human beings. They should be developing, they should be expanding their knowledge, they should be getting updated materials and updated knowledge. Even though they're teaching about the past, so you could say like that doesn't change, but it does. And really seeing the teachers themselves as their main resource, meaning not to necessarily bring some specialist from the academia and say, okay, this person is going to tell you everything you need to know about, let's say, the Bible, okay? Meaning it's okay to also learn from specialists, but that teachers should have a say. And that goes back to the thing I spoke about in the beginning, that just like learners should have this familiarity and this feeling of ownership about their culture, I think that teachers as well, they shouldn't feel that they're just messengers relaying a message that was given to them by, let's say, the Ministry of Education or who knows who, or it's written in the Bible, so we have to learn it, but rather that they are invested, they're engaged themselves as learners and as people, as in, with evolving identities, and they present that passion and that connection in the classroom. So I love the project and just the notion of communities of teachers, as opposed to teachers doing all of their professional development by listening to lectures by others, but rather that teachers share their experiences, they share their insights, they share their ideas for how to teach in the classroom, and they grow as a group and as individuals. So that's one thing I'm involved in. And the
How
other
does it
thing is,
work on the everyday level? How does it work?
well, teachers meet per, let's say, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks or whatever, and they meet with each other and discuss things that come up in the classroom. Of course, we emphasize certain topics, like there is a facilitator or someone who's facilitating the whole process and the conversation, but it really is to give value to what's for each teacher's own experience, and not to sort of say, it doesn't matter what you're doing in the classroom, let's talk about what should be happening in the classroom, or let's talk to a specialist who knows better than you. Because like you were saying before, when a teacher goes into the classroom, you close the door and it's your domain, right? Like you need to take ownership and be responsible for whatever's happening in that room. So to empower the teachers, I think it's a super important message. And I don't think it was always true that the Ministry of Education and other organizations really gave that message. So I personally think it's a great message, and it's really empowering. And I see the value of teachers just asking each other the questions and learning from each other, and not only from scholars and people who are sitting in some room and reading these amazing books and everything, but they never have no contact with 7th graders who can honestly be a little bit of a nuisance. I have one at home, so I know firsthand.
Oh, you wouldn't believe how whatever you said, every word was golden. I remember coming from Revivim, which again is an honors program, and coming to the classroom, certain that I am God's gift to teaching, and that as the more experience I have, I understand how experience is important, right? And I had difficult time at high school, and this is one of the reasons I'm not there anymore. But it's really something that I think a community of teachers can definitely help going through this phase, which is not easy, because you're never, I talked before, but again, it's not exactly the same experience. And even if you come from a very good education program, and I think Revivim is and was, and I had the greatest mentors. I had Leah Mazo and I had Roni Magidov. Both of them were in charge of like the Bible program nationally. Like both of them are amazing people and the best mentors, second only to Shuvi, obviously. So even though I had this great training, I had a very hard time, when you get to the classroom, and especially if you want to bring the academic side, and you find yourself that most of the work you do is not directly teaching in many cases, and the less good you are, and I was not good in that aspect, the less you have to do with teaching, but you have to do with getting the students to learn and doing the administrative stuff around it and discipline and stuff like that. Which again, I love teaching. I'm not so keen on the others, but you unfortunately in the school level they go together. It's very hard to separate the one from the other. So it's an experience which I can relate to on a personal note. People are asking. People are asking if the National Library is open to non-Jews and non-Israelis, and
Of course. Of course. And there's a lot of materials. Everything's also like there's a website in English as well, and you can search for anything. Of course, some of the actual texts are not in English, but in Hebrew, or in other languages. But yes, of course, it's open to anyone, and there are many different groups and individuals who come to study and learn there.
Right. And now I want to move on to the third question which we had before, and I still remember it, surprisingly. And I think it's part of a shift that has been around, and we've talked about it because of demographic changes as well. And maybe even this COVID-19 situation is really pushing it forward. When the state of Israel was founded, the Jews living in Mandatorial Palestine were a small percent of the Jewish people, especially if we go, let's say 100%, 100 years ago, before the Holocaust, it was a very small minority. And today, I will kind of, broadly speaking, half the world Jewry is in Israel, and there is almost the same size Jewish community in America. We've talked about it. I actually learned at the Hebrew University from Professor Sergio de la Pergula about Jewish demographics, and the shift in numbers is also leading to a bit of a shift in responsibility views of Israel towards the then called diaspora, today mainly two Jewish centers of life with other Jewish communities in wherever, but you have two big Jewish communities, that's Israel and America, or North America. So how this outreach program, and you've mentioned the Jewish summer camps that are off because of COVID-19, and how are other programs related to this outreach across the pond? And moreover, you yourself have a very special experience in that sense. You were born in America, raised here, went back to America, and now working for the National Library of Israel, keeping that channel open with the Jewish communities and Jewish education abroad. So I would love to hear more about that from you.
Right. So definitely I see a positive shift. At least there's something positive about this whole epidemic, that we see a real appreciation for the role of World Jewry. That's, I think, the term that sort of, instead of saying diaspora, some people choose World Jewry just to say that, or right, the Jewish world, just to say that, because diaspora can feel a little bit judgmental. That people realize that in different times of history, there are ups and downs in every community. Many people also sort of make the parallel to the time of the writing of the Talmud, when there was a center in Jerusalem and there was actually a stronger center in Babylon, and that's where the Babylonian Talmud was written. So just to say that spiritual and religious and cultural life and creativity can exist, of course, outside of Israel. And I think for many Israelis who really were raised on this ethos of, we have to be strong, we have to, um, stay in Israel, and like that's the only place we'll be safe. I think that of course is one narrative, and it maybe served a purpose at certain times of history, but people can appreciate today that there's room for other narratives as well, just like we were saying before. So I think that people are learning more and more to respect other Jewish communities in the world, and not to only see the Israeli community as the ultimate way of, I don't know, being Jewish, as it were. And for me, it really is a realization of the value of peoplehood. And I think that that's what kept this culture going over the years, that ability to really,
When you use the term peoplehood, it is almost a technical term in Jewish studies following Mordecai Kaplan. Are you talking about that kind of peoplehood, or are you using?
I think that for me, peoplehood is to some extent like saying diversity, meaning in the sense that you can appreciate that one nation doesn't have to only be one, like it's not uniformity. It's actually richer and better if it's more diverse, and to not be intimidated by different identities that our national narrative.
It's reaching out to the whole world, isn't it? Every baby is the same. I'm going to mute. I'm going to mute now.
Indeed,
Yeah,
Simon says it's the game where you have to do what Simon says,
knows his
but that's not the game today.
Okay, so I don't know if he's saying what kind of comment is that, like a.
He is supporting you. He is very much enthralled by it, I think.
I think that, again, in different, I would say, different stages of forming our identity. I would say now I'm saying as an Israeli Jew, like I do see myself as an Israeli. I think that it had a purpose, sort of to stay strong and to believe in the path that was chosen. But I really think that after 70 and some years, we can relax, and we can appreciate that someone else's definition of Jewish life and Jewish culture, and there's really a beautiful, like there's a lot of creativity and cultural diversity all over the world. And I think that it doesn't make us weaker, it makes us stronger. And I think that's the key to understanding that diversity isn't something that should intimidate you. It's actually something that helps you grow as a nation, as an individual. And again, I say this also as an educator. I think that in Israel, life is very tense, not only now, but in general. I think people grow up in a very, I would say, a much more intense environment, much more things are happening much quicker. There's less space for everyone to breathe and for everyone to live. Whatever you do is usually going to actually bother or even hurt someone else, even if you didn't mean to, just because of not only the physical space, but I think also the cultural space is very, very, very narrow. There are a lot of arguments about the foundations of Israeli and Jewish society. And I think we're, if I compare it to America, where again, people, and the Jewish community included, are very much accustomed to freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And it's really difficult for them to see the situations that we reach in Israel that can become very, very violent, even, I would say.
I would say that in today's atmosphere, amazingly, even freedom of speech in America is put into a very, very bold question mark, with cancel culture and with other elements which infringe upon freedom of speech in very troubling ways.
I agree. But I think that at least as I would say, no one would like to admit that about American society. And that's not those weren't the foundations of American society, the opposite. And it's true that in every society we see those trends of that negative kind of and violent energy. But I think that in Israel, it was almost by definition, like when the state was founded to some degree. And we see it in many different ways. And I think that's just reflecting on that and coming to terms with that is part of also fixing it. Because again, what was good for 1948 is not necessarily good for us now. And that's okay to say that there were certain things that happened that we're not 100% with, and we're not going to support or we're not going to justify every decision and everything that was done in the name of the Jewish state. I think that there's value in a little bit of humility and even a little bit of, I would say, feeling ashamed of certain things that happened in our history and to grow from that as well. And I think that's also a lesson for students and teachers alike. I think to be able to do that, to sort of look in at your tradition, at your culture in a more critical way, and not to be intimidated by that.
Mm-hmm. It's really fascinating. I think that I could continue this talk for hours, because I would really want to know what are the boundaries of like this laying back, like being less tense. So where do you put your edges? How do you define yourself from the surroundings? And do we, for instance, I'll just throw a question, which again, I am not necessarily calling for you to answer, but even the law of return is something like that, you know. So getting into that big discussion, and we actually mentioned here in the past, but I really want to have a little bit of time for a Q&A. I gobbled up so much of your time, and let's see if we can hear others. Georgie, yes.
Yeah, my question is, since it just came up to my mind, people are returning from different parts of the globe. So what would be the possibility of books which Jews can enhance in the library? Because people are coming from Moscow, people are coming from, so you understand. So library itself is having a section of how many languages itself.
Okay, so how many languages are there in the National Library of Israel? I would say countless. Not countless. There is a number probably, but it's many, right?
Many multiple languages. And I would say there are some languages that there are some items that are in Yiddish and languages that are becoming less and less common, Ladino. So the library can keep those treasures and preserve them. But yes, there are books in many languages. And
yeah, I have a Bible collection, and I think I might have a Bible that the National Library doesn't have, but I don't want to say which because they'll come and take it. No. Okay, no, I trust they won't. Guys, any more questions? Simon, I see your hand is still up. Do you want to?
Well, I want a question. I mean, it's not really a question. It's more like a statement, because, you and I have put up with each other since 2009. And I think that counts as a relationship. Okay.
Sure.
But we've had our differences. We've had our arguments. And
we still have.
I'm not going to dispute that, because if I disputed that, that would be
right. You'll
right,
prove
okay.
it, right?
Yeah. So I'm not going to dispute that. But this is the whole point. This is why we do this sort of stuff, and why we go back to the most ancient scriptures, and we look at, as far as we can, how our ancestors thought about things, how they expressed themselves in the most beautiful language, and how that has been conveyed to us in this future that we live in. And I just wanted to say that I was very moved by your talk, because I think one thing we can do, we can't dispute everything, we can't resolve everything over the internet and in a discussion, but we can document things. We can write, how things are, what are facts, and I've talked about my personal issues, and other people talk about their personal issues, and I have huge issues about the Irish, you know, English, I'm Irish. How, you know, we treated the Irish. It was horrendous. It was just like,
Listen, it's
like,
half the world you
like,
mistreated, not just the Irish. So.
well, you see, there you are. You're right, Netanel. You're
Yeah,
right.
listen, the Americans got, had problems with you. We had problems with you. India's got problems, it's half the world. Yeah, China. So, but listen, you cannot judge your empire, former empire, based on current values, I think. And secondly, you're not guilty. You might be implicated in a sense, but you're not guilty. That's how I view things. Again, it's already a discussion that goes to the biblical times. The Bible talks about, the sins of the fathers should not be visited upon the sons. And on the other hand, it says that God is visiting the sins of the fathers on second, third, fourth generation. So these voices already go back to biblical times. What's
That's
guilt
right.
and what's implication, and it's a very, very vivid discussion. Even today in the restitution, the question of restitution for slavery in America. These are hot topics, wherever you go. So it's always relevant.
I think you're absolutely right. And this is why we do this stuff.
Right.
Online. This is why we have
try to make the
these
world
discussions.
Better. Right.
Yeah. Well, we're doing our best, aren't we?
Right. So Shuvi, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Is there anything else you want to tell us about your endeavors or the National Library of Israel or anything else? This is the time.
Thanks. No, I feel like I spoke a lot, and I'm inspired by this group of listeners and learners. And thanks for having me.
I see that we have another surprise surprise question from my good friend Surprise from South Africa. So Surprise, please.
Okay, so I just want to ask if does that library allow for tourism to go to read it, or it's just private for the national people there?
Oh, tourists do come and visit. Again, most of the books are not accessible. They're in the archives. You can order them and ask the librarians to bring them up to the main floor. But yes,
Surprise, next time you come to Israel, next time you come to Israel, again, I'll take you, I'll bring you to the National Library. If you want to put it on the agenda, we can do that as well.
Definitely.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's all.
Okay, excellent. So Shuvi, thank you so much again for coming. It was an excellent time for us, and I hope you enjoyed it as well.
I did, thanks.
Tomorrow we have Rabbi Dr. Eliyahu Aviad, who is an expert on Maimonides and on Yemenite jewelry. We're going to talk about Yemenite jewelry. I love it. I sometimes pray in a Yemenite synagogue as well. And for me as a teacher of the Bible and a teacher of biblical Hebrew, the different traditions that you've mentioned in the National Phonothek and National Archives are also very interesting in that sense, because as you know, the Yemenite tradition of reading the Hebrew is very different than the modern Israeli pronunciation. And we're going to talk about all of these things. So you're invited as well if you don't know what to do tomorrow at 8 and you want to avoid putting your kids to sleep again, leaving it all to the lesser half. You're more than welcome. And I will see you guys tomorrow.
Thank you again,
Shuvi. What we do here, we do this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shuvi.
Bye bye.
Thank you so much, Siddhartha.
Thank you, Shubi.